Number 5 is Alive. These were the divine words of wisdom that came from the hit movie Short Circuit, the popular 1986 science fiction fantasy movie about a robot built for the military, who, thanks to a bolt of lightning, becomes sentient and self-aware, where the robot known as Number 5 escapes from its facility and heads out into the world, where he is befriended by a young lady called Stephanie, played by Ali Sheedy, where she teaches him about the ways of the world, where robotics expert Newton Crosby, played by Steve Guttenberg, is sent out to find Number 5 and disassemble him, where he too realises that Number 5 now seems to have a soul and tries to help the robot from the pesky military, where the robot embraces his new being as Johnny 5. So today we are going back to look into this classic tale about a robot who becomes sentient by looking into 10 things that you didn't know about Short Circuit. So let's check it out. I always say that.
I know you don't understand, but when you're dead, you're dead. That's just the way it is.
Disassemble! Dead!
Hey, slow down!
Number 10. Short Circuit started in the name of education. It was an educational video distributed to colleges about robotics that lit the spark for the creation of Short Circuit. Short Circuit's producers had distributed the video and were intrigued with the idea of sentient robots and their relationships with human counterparts, and the fascination of humans being unaware of robots being sentient. Producers David Foster and Lawrence Turman looked into other films such as Star Wars for inspiration for their robot story. In fact, thanks to C-3PO and R2-D2, there was a sudden craze in cute robotic sidekicks in science fiction movies. In fact, the very year Short Circuit came out, 2 other science fiction family movies also came out, with Flight of the Navigator and Space Camp, both of which also featured fun, playful robots, with Ralph in Flight of the Navigator and Jinx in Space Camp. However, Short Circuit took the cute, playful robot trope that step further and gave Johnny 5 a journey of self-discovery, of learning his true self and what it means to be human. Number 9. The movie could have featured human cyborgs and aliens. When it came to developing the story, it seemed that writers S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock couldn't figure out how to make the Johnny 5 robot actually come to life, complete with a mind of his own with human-like qualities and empathy. One idea that was thrown out there was a man who becomes a robot with only his brain left, but it was decided that that might be a bit too gruesome and shocking, considering Short Circuit is a family movie, which would have taken Short Circuit more into RoboCop territories. Another idea was having aliens come down and zap Johnny 5, and thus bringing him to life. But it was felt that that would probably put too much focus on how Johnny 5 became alive, rather than him simply becoming alive and thus getting the story rolling. So the 2 writers reluctantly went with the idea of getting zapped by lightning. They weren't too happy with the lightning strike gimmick, but felt it served to swiftly move the story forward.
Let's not forget that the writing team of Wilson and Maddock also gave us Batteries Not Included and Tremors.
Number 8. Saturday Night Robot Fever. Director John Badham was hired as Short Circuit's director. He had previously directed the 1979 version of Dracula, along with Blue Thunder and War Games. However, at that stage he was most famous for directing the hit disco movie Saturday Night Fever. And to point this out, there is even a scene where Johnny 5 watches Saturday Night Fever and even busts out some of John Travolta's moves in a sequence that was a callback to the director's earlier movie. In fact, Badham was such a hands-on director, he even had a cameo in the movie as a cameraman. After Short Circuit, Badham would go on to direct Stakeout, Bird on a Wire, The Drop Zone and Nick of Time, which in my opinion is a very underrated 90s thriller, but hey, that's a story for another video sometime.
Not to mention the fact that Johnny 5 was voiced by Tim Blaney, aka the guy who voiced Frank the Pug in the Men in Black movies.
Number 7. Release. Short Circuit performed quite well upon its release, with it earning $40.7 million on a $9 million budget, and opened up at number 1 at the box office, and was the 21st highest grossing movie of 1986, beating The Fly, Little Shop of Horrors and The Three Amigos, of which, considering its budget, is fairly impressive. However, despite the fact that the movie's sales were good, the movie did have several criticisms from film critics. A common thing that seemed to happen was the character Johnny Five was compared to the character E.T., with critics feeling like the robot character just didn't have the heart or emotion of the lost alien seen in Spielberg's classic movie. E.T. did bring about a new trend of unlikely out-of-this-world characters becoming humanized and friends with everyday humans. A trend that would follow the next year with Harry and the Hendersons, and then Mac and Me and Batteries Not Included, and so on. But Short Circuit was different, as the main focus was a robot going through a realization of self-awareness and discovery, rather than being a cutesy home mascot which a lot of the other E.T.-like movies did. And also, famed critic Roger Ebert would go on to say that Short Circuit was, quote, too cute for its own good.
But despite clashes with critics at the time, Short Circuit was fully embraced by movie audiences and is still to this day a well-loved fan favourite. Probably even more so.
Number 6. Filmed in a town used in other classic movies. If you have ever watched Short Circuit and felt that the town scene in the movie looked a little familiar and like you have seen it before, well, that's because chances are you have, as Short Circuit was filmed in the same town where The Goonies and Kindergarten Cop were filmed. That town being Astoria, Oregon. Yeah, Astoria has now seen some pretty crazy stuff, what with its robots, Fratellis being on the loose, and Arnold Schwarzenegger screaming about who is your daddy and what does he do. Short Circuit also has ties to another popular classic movie, that being Ghostbusters, as the sound of the lasers that the robots used is the same sound effects used for the Ghostbusters proton packs.
And having all these links to other classic 80s and 90s movies just adds even more to the charm of Short Circuit.
Number 5. Single. Not only did Short Circuit climb up the box office, but it also seemed to climb up the musical charts too, as a single was released for the movie called Who's Johnny, which was performed by American singer-songwriter Elle DeBarge, with the single making it to number 3 on the Billboard charts and number 1 on the Hot Singles chart. When the song is heard in the movie, number 5 decides that his name is going to be Johnny, so the song is actually a huge part of the movie's plot. The funky musical number also came out with a very interesting music video, as we see DeBarge in a court case, along with Short Circuit star Ali Sheedy and, a cardboard cutout of Steve Guttenberg. Okay, weird. Where DeBarge proceeds to sing his catchy tune to the courtroom, and the courtroom then breaks into dance, where Johnny Five also makes an appearance. And by Johnny Five, I mean shots of his robotic hand, suggesting that they could only have access to the robot arm prop for filming.
But who knows, maybe they didn't want to give away what Johnny Five looks like to people who hadn't seen the movie yet. But it's still a very fun and enjoyable single.
Number 4. Video game. A video game was released to coincide with the movie. The Short Circuit game was released by Ocean Software and was released on several computer systems such as the Commodore 64. The game had 2 stages. The first stage features Johnny Five trying to escape from a lab where other robots trying to stop him. And then for the game's second stage, it becomes more like a standard side-scroller where Johnny is out into the wilderness where he is trying to dodge other enemies, such as birds. So many birds! I don't know what's going on here, but Johnny Five must have done something to really piss these birds off, as they seem to be hell-bent on swooping him. Despite the fact that Johnny Five making his way through a birdemic may have sounded like a fun game, it didn't exactly stand out and become a classic in time. But it is still perfectly enjoyable and entertaining, although I would still like to get to the bottom of what Johnny Five did exactly to annoy these birds. Number 3. Failed reboot. A sequel to Short Circuit was released in 1988, in which this time Johnny Five was in a city setting, in which taking the action from town to city seems to be a standard thing to do with movie sequels. I won't go into the sequel too much as that should be its own video, but it wasn't as well received as the original movie. There was plans to make a third movie, but the plans were scrapped. Johnny Five did however go on to appear in an educational video called Hot Cars Cold Facts, However, although Johnny 5 may now seem to be a product of the 80s, there have been attempts to bring him back onto the big screen for a reboot. In 2009, it was announced that Paul Blart Mall Cop director Steve Carr would direct the movie, and it would focus on a boy from a troubled family befriending Johnny 5. Because, yeah, that doesn't sound familiar, but nothing came of it. Then in 2011, the project got a new director, with SpongeBob SquarePants the movie director Tim Hill taking the helm. But as of 2019, nothing has happened.
And maybe Short Circuit isn't meant to be a modern movie. Maybe it should be left back in the 80s, for us all to enjoy now, rather than making a new one.
Number 2. Screen test disaster. The screen test didn't go swiftly. Test audiences didn't like the more hands-on relationship between Johnny 5 and the Stephanie Speck character. In fact, they were so against this human and robot on-screen affection, they supposedly booed many of the scenes where they were together. So with it being clear the audience was against Johnny 5 and Stephanie having a more hands-on friendship, extended scenes of the two hugging and kissing were cut from the movie. But the audience weren't the only ones who had issues with Short Circuit at its test screenings. The movie's very own director John Badham had issues with the amount of chatting the Johnny 5 robot actually does, to the degree where he found himself thinking, "Number 5, just shut up." So thus, more scenes displaying Johnny 5's more talkative side were removed. Bonus entry, other castings. So in Short Circuit, G.W. Bailey played the security officer, Captain Scroder. This was something of a reunion for him and Steve Guttenberg, as the two previously starred together in Police Academy just 2 years earlier. Funny thing is, I always felt that Bailey's character in Police Academy and Short Circuit were basically the same, as they have this similar comical foil in position of authority shtick going on. The Ben character was cast with actor-director Fisher Stevens, something that would spark controversy in more recent times. However, early on during the movie's filming, Stevens was fired and the part was recast with Bronson Pinchot, probably due to his small but memorable role in Beverly Hills Cop. However, as the filming commenced, Pinchot left the production to star in the sitcom Perfect Strangers instead, so Stevens was then rehired. Also, what did become of the original Johnny 5 robot? Where did it end up? Well, the prop was unveiled in 2022 in Adam Savage's Tested at a prop store, where Johnny 5 was all set to go on auction. And, to be honest, looking in pretty good nick. And it is said that the prop was brought by a private collector in the UK. So, I guess if this is true, Johnny 5 now calls the UK home. Yep, he's gone from Dr. Pepper to Sergeant Pepper.
Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
What is going on?
Number 1, Johnny 5 might have been stop motion. The original idea for bringing Number 5 alive in Short Circuit was to make the robot out of stop motion special effects technology, but instead director John Badham opted for practical effects, in which over $1 million was used to create Johnny 5, and considering the movie's budget was $9 million, you can see that a great chunk of the budget was used for Johnny 5 alone, not to mention the fact that it could take up to 12 people to operate the robot prop. Johnny 5 was designed by Sid Mead, who also worked on designs for Blade Runner and Tron, so Short Circuit was in good hands. And throughout several stages of his design, Johnny 5 at one stage was going to be army camouflage, and then at one stage he was going to be white, until they went with his more metallic texture. And at one stage his head was going to be a lot more bug-like, until we got the design that movie audiences would go on to know and love.
So that was my look into Short Circuit. The funny, heartfelt story of a small robot who goes a long way. I think Short Circuit's popularity has increased over the years, and maybe its big appeal is the fact that underneath all the gags and robot tech, there is a very human story that people can relate to. Anyway, I'm Minty, and Number 5 will always be alive in our hearts. See ya!